Hello and welcome. This evening, we are very grateful to have Professor Elliot Abrams, PhD, here to speak with us. He's a professor emeritus of anthropology at Ohio University, an arts and sciences transformative faculty. His list of selected publications is over 40 items, covering Ohio and Mesoamerican archaeology in both Spanish and English, starting in 1981 all the way up to last year, and he's not done. There's a long list of archaeology and anthropology courses that he has taught here at Ohio University, which he says he really enjoys. And very importantly, he is the founder of the Ohio Archaeology Field School, which has excavated at almost 24 prehistorical archaeological sites in Ohio, right here in the Hocking Valley, Adena and Hopewell Mounds, settlements, societies, ceremonies, politics, economics, and architecture are all within his purview. His colleagues would say that he has made, and I quote, revolutionary breakthroughs in Ohio anthropology. Everything was different after he started the field school. He says the library is a critical source, especially for older and non-electronic sources, which with we agree. There is a display in the hallway, if you have not seen it, right across from the entrance of some of the items that he has excavated. He is still writing and researching. He says it's wonderful to go into semi-retirement now, knowing that the new faculty continue to strengthen the tradition of archaeology and anthropology and the classics at OU. This is the first of a month-long series of programs about the archaeology. There's a lot of big long words in this introduction. About archaeology, and you each have a flyer on your seat about the coming programs that are offered in celebration. So, Dr. Abrams, welcome. We can't wait to hear.
Thanks so much. Well, thank you so much. That was a wonderful introduction. 30 years of Ohio archaeology. No one person, of course, is responsible for the field school. I started it in 1986. I got here in the fall of 1985. Paul Patton has taken over from me, and he's done an outstanding job, incredible. So a lot of people deserve a lot of credit. Before I get into the content of it, we've had over 340 students. They've done all the heavy lifting. I just sit around there, walk around, get your line straight. And I walk over, that kind of thing. It takes, some skill to do that, though. We've had a lot of, the students really deserve all the credit. My wife, who's not here, though, she deserves a lot of credit, too. I'd come back from the site the first day, and I'd say, I don't know, Ann. I'm not sure we've got everything there. She'd just give me the same old advice every field season. Just dig some more. Yeah, come on. Come on, Al. Come on, man. Dig some more and you'll find it. And we always end up finding things. Jean Mapes, environmental studies, when she was here, she's retired. When I speak of master's students in our program, we don't have a master's program in anthropology, but we had a master's track in environmental archaeology that Ann and I created with Jean. And she was really wonderful for that. Of course, without the landowners, none of this happens. And the landowners here have been the greatest landowners I've ever seen. They're curious, interested, knowledgeable, helpful. We have one of the landowners here, Paul's grandma, used to bring us lemonade. Come on, how easy is that? So just wonderful. The landowners here, I've never seen more accommodating people ever. And of course, finally, without institutional support, nothing gets done in a university. We've had great dean support. Dean Frank right here has been hugely supportive, but I started it way back in '85, and the dean back then, some people may know, maybe not, Don Eckelman. Don was great, he was a geologist, and then he had the brain trust of Spike Molyneux and Joyce Cohen, and those three were fabulous. I started the field school, I had my startup money of $750. And, but Don gave me an extra 500, and I always appreciate that. So I didn't have to buy all the shovels out of pocket. So we started this, and you know, there's two major goals. Is you want to educate your students, obviously. It's a university setting, so we have to have excavations. We take them out to actual sites. This is the Allen site from Emory Allen. Way out on County Road 17. I'll teach you a little, show you a little geography of the area out by Carter Lumber on 17. This is us before color film, excavating at the Allen site, and screens. We teach them how to grid off sites. This is Chris Moorhart. He's a professor of archaeology at Arizona State. Cut his teeth here in Southeastern Ohio Field School. We teach them lab work, all of those types of things. How to do the logic behind archaeology. So it articulates with courses, and it articulates with a lot of the things they'll do. Also, it's not only an educational mission, with first and foremost, but they also get careers. And this is one of the things that startles people when you say, you know, you can get a job in archaeology. And it's startling. Way back, I remember the very first excavation at the Boudinot site. I started to get some of the students jobs when they graduated, and they were, it was like something from heaven. My God, an archaeologist can get a job? But yes, in fact, we started to get students jobs right after the very first field school. There's a field called CRM, Cultural Resource Management. 80% of archaeologists in the country work in CRM, and they always need entry-level workers with field experience. A lot of our students have gone on to CRM. I have a student, Vince Whitlatch. He came out to my last excavation. He's close to retirement now. He's been in CRM for all of these years, and at one site, Vince came out at the county home site in 1998, and he said, "El, I need a lot of workers, so I'd like to hire your crew." I said, "Vince, I'm in the middle of a field school. I can't give you my crew." So we stood there in the parking lot outside the county home on State Route 13, and we negotiated. I'd close the field school early so that he could hire the crew. And he said, "How many students want a job? You know, at like $18 an hour plus this and this and this." And half the crew said, "I want that." So he hired half the crew, and they worked for just a 2-week job, but they made enough money during the 2-week job to pay off the cost of the tuition for the field school. So, and then some of them went on and on in those CRM jobs. So it's a life experience. They get jobs to, as I joked, pay off your debt to society. So you can get a grad out of college and actually get a job. Because I'm retired, somebody has to pay taxes. No, but also you go on to be a professor. Obviously, Paul Patton is one of our sterling examples from our field school to go on and finish the route. You know, we have quite a few professors out there, actually. I'll show you perhaps, if I didn't have every photo of every student, of course, but a lot of them. And as was alluded to, sometimes we discover new sites in our field school. This is the Ohio University Mound. It's behind Carriage Hill. It's up on the Danes Ridge. It's the 5th mound up there. The other 4 are destroyed. But this is an Adena burial mound that I found. And I said, I'm going to call it the Ohio University Mound. It's on OU land. So I named it that with the hope that it would stay as the OU Mound. And as far as I know, no one's ever messed with it. So sometimes we discover new sites in the process. Well, we always discover new sites in the process of the field school. And, well, that's a messy slide, but we publish a lot with students as well. All of these publications, Paul Patton, Sarah Weaver, Tracy, Paul again, Rachel, all of these are student publications from our field school excavations. So Mary, we started this when she was Mary Sugar. By the time it got published, she'd married. Anyway, John Hicks is in the University of Illinois at Chicago getting his PhD. Nicole is, I think, around this area. Stacy's coming in this month. Nicole Stump, I think, works in Wayne. Yeah, GIS. Yeah, Sarah D'Aloia worked here at the it's the Tom and Ann Walker site. Tom kept saying to me, for some people who know Tom Walker, kept saying, "Al, you got to excavate my land. I've got these great sites and all of this." I finally did. And Sarah published on that. And then we have Margie. She got a PhD in archaeology from Michigan State. Dave got a plum job in Hawaii. He's one of the archaeologists in the state of Hawaii. Some people may know the Blazers from around here, Harold Blazer, but that's Jeremy. He got his master's here. And John Waldron got a PhD also in archaeology and geography. So we have a lot of these publications and work with students so they get careers, hopefully, a life experience. Some of them publish with us. But beyond that, we also have the significance of these excavations. They're not just exercises to take students out and dig holes in the ground and find some things and map them, and etc. It's a serious issue. If we don't excavate archaeological sites and seriously reconstruct the past, then those societies remain invisible. So it's a very serious issue. In 95% or so of the time we've been on Earth as a species, it's archaeological. So that's something that an old professor, Lou Binford, used to argue is we're not the least important social science. We should proclaim ourselves the most important because we represent 95% of time, and what other discipline can ever get to that except for archaeology? But he was a very bold guy, Lou. Well, in terms of answering important questions, when I got here, when I got here, people in Ohio were saying, "Why would you excavate in the Hocking Valley? There's nobody there. It's nothing there." And my Mayan colleagues, because I was a Mesoamericanist way back then, said, "Why would you excavate in Ohio?" I mean, so, but in anthropology, every group of people are equally significant. So we don't discriminate in any possible way. So one anthropologist in Ohio said it was just backwater cultures. And I remember thinking, holy smokes, that's pretty bad for an anthropologist. So we embarked on the Hocking Valley, and the question that was the biggest question, in my opinion, was what we call the origin of tribal societies. The origins of agriculture. It's from hunting and gathering nomadic societies to sedentary groups that are growing their own food, living in sedentary villages, articulating with that. Around the world, it's the Neolithic Revolution. It's done in the Huang Ho River Valley, in Mesoamerica, in Tehuacan, all over the world. This is a process that in 7-8 places on Earth, people decided we're staying put. We're going to build bigger houses, we're going to grow food, or we're going to expand what we're doing. And this is one of the world hinge transitions. So, if you want to do something important, you have to ask big questions. So I said, that's the big question. Maybe the other one would be, when did people first get here? But that's awfully hard to answer. And I said, that transition, that's going to dominate 30 years of what I do. So each site that we selected, they're not all related to that question, but a lot of them are. And I intended to do that. Each site gives you some data, and it doesn't give you other data. And where people lived in the past are these terrace zones You don't want to live right along the water, and you can't live on the slopes. And you don't want to live way up on the ridge top. So you live on those first, second terraces. That's where we live. That's where we put our agricultural field. So it's tougher than it sounds. When people in Mesoamerica, when I've talked to my colleagues there, they say, you just take off the plow zone and then you just map stuff. And it's pretty simple archaeology. Actually, it's can be pretty complicated. I've dug pyramids and temples. That's easy. You can't miss them. If you're digging a Mayan pyramid and you can't find it, that's really, and in terms of the ceramics, every shovel you pull out 50, 60 polychrome pots. That's, in some ways, it's a hard mapping job because you're constantly busy keeping track of everything. But this archaeology is actually challenging in some ways because it's all mixed up and it's somewhat ephemeral. But that was the question, and I said, well, if that's the question, then the sites that we have to excavate are domestic sites. And not everybody was excavating domestic sites because we have burial mounds like the OU mound, and those are interesting, and you get a lot of data from that too. But that's where people buried their loved ones, their deceased. It was an important element of life and important sites. But I said, if we want to really find out what these people, the population, starting archaeology from the ground up, you've got to have demographics, you have to have settlement patterns, ecology, climate. You got to know what their economy was, and then you can start to put together from that domestic economy. So that's what I've tried to focus on, not always, but even that, then things articulate. Like Paul just excavated this fabulous site on the ridge top, this Greendale ridge top site, and found economic activity that was being done away from the domestic site. So it articulates. So then once you get that skeleton of domestic sites and what life was like in those, then everything else can articulate with that. So the first site I dug, I'm not going to spend tons of time on each one of these. Again, this was way back before color film. This is the Boudinot 4 site right out here. Mr. Alan Boudinot, who's passed away since, out in Millfield. This is a domestic site. This is a high elevation field, and we excavated that. Again, I don't have the best slides there, but Rob Ball right over there, he got the first job in CRM. I think he was elated because his mom and dad were there at graduation, and I set him up with a job, and he could go over to his mom and dad and say, I got a job. It was like, wow. John Snyder, I saw him just this year. He lives up in Pickerington. He came down to say hello after 30 years. He got a job in CR. And a lot of these students, and this is this first excavation. It looks historic because of the quality of the photo. Right, they're the ancients digging the ancients, yes. What we found at the Boudinot site was our first hamlet or our first small village. We dated it at, the average date is about 500 BC or BCE. We found maygrass. This is where Deanne Weimer came to my house and sat down, and I handed her the box of eco-facts, and she started to do that. She's a leading archaeobotanist, who Paul probably will, as she retires, Paul will become the leading archaeobotanist in a sense. And Deanne found early maygrass at about 100 BC, and she was ecstatic that we found early squash. We found the outlines of some residential stuff. We found hearths. So we cut our teeth on that, and I also met a fellow, Dave Hudnell, who was a local guy, and he worked with us, and he was a fabulous excavator and a friend at the time. These are the kinds of things we find, points and scrapers and these domestic things. Not a very exciting slide, but only to be improved by this one. These are the the groundstone artifacts, nutcrackers and other kinds of things. Here's a 500 BC edge of a celt that we found at the Boudinot site. So we're starting, just cutting our teeth on how to do this and what these kinds of sites represent. And we conducted a survey on that. This is I have 2 blue shirts. This is one of them. Bought them at the old Sears, lasted 30 years, still have them. Well, we also conducted a survey around there where we put in shovel tests and found where sites were. And the significance there is because the Boudinots have one of those burial mounds right on the high ridge, and all of these sites articulate with that. And that's when I started to formulate this idea that these people, when they start to settle down, they settle in a spot, but then they move to another specific location in that area, and it's anchored by the burial mound. And I'm not the first one probably to come up with that thought, but I was certainly, it seemed pretty clear to me when we did that Boudinot survey that you have some sites in the floodplain, some sites on the terrace, all of these little economic sites, but then they come back and there's this burial mound. This was Alan's setting mound because he's got the park bench, and that's what he would do. And then we took a deep detour and we actually excavated one of the burial mounds in the plains called the Armitage Mound. The owner was very nice and he helped us out a ton, but he was going to, it's private land, and he was going to bulldoze it to put in for the housing development. And this is before the laws kicked in that would have done, maybe prevented that kind of thing. This is 1987. The drought of 87, I remember every field school weather condition from those years. And this is a bigger mound. This is a collective burial where people are coming together from these various habitation sites and they're burying individuals. We didn't find very much. This was an intrepid crew. We didn't find hardly any artifacts. And it was pretty hard soil. It was rock hard. I used to buy them ice creams, just try to keep morale going. You know, this was one of my great volunteers, Harley Baker. He's passed away since. Harley was from Rockbridge, and he'd come down. He's sort of a legendary ecologist from that area. He asked, could I volunteer? I said, sure. This is Dave Hudnell. Yeah, there was a lot of starting and stopping on this excavation. It was pretty tough, but we did find there was a primary mound down there, the first level. And then it kind of got a little iffy, but as we dug, we took out enough of it, we'd find hearths as we went down. So if you're building a hearth in a mound, that means you're standing on a surface to do that. So we had 4 episodes of construction, and I've quantified that in terms of labor. We found ultimately at the very bottom, I'm not going to show a slide of it, but we found an individual at the bottom, about 55 years old. I think he's a male. It was iffy. George Milner at Penn State was the first person to try to decide whether it was a male or female, and he said it's iffy, but it's probably a male. So we'll see. You know, in great shape. When Harley looked at him, he said, "My God, he's got a better hip than I do." And he was surrounded, and this is where science, this is why archaeology is so great. You know, it's science. We found what I thought were these packages of bark, of human bone. They're cremated. And they were clearly cremated bone. And I picked these up. Nice to see Nicole there. And I'd pick them up and I'd say, this is probably human bone, because everybody in the field had written that human cremations were part of these burials. So we had a central burial, guy stretched out, and then 14, 15 pockets of bones in bark. So I said, okay, well, they're living in these valley system, like Monday Creek or Sunday Creek, something like that. They disinter somebody who's already been buried. and cremated. How do you carry them down to the plains? You wrap them in bark. So they're honoring their esteemed individual who's passed away. And then other villages, so you have 15 different villages. When John Hicks did that was a senior thesis on GIS of the settlement pattern of Monday Creek. I always get Monday and Sunday confused. He found about 15 villages that existed at 100 AD. That's when they're roughly building this 200 AD. So I said, oh, there you go. They're each disinterring somebody, carrying down and honoring them. But this is where science is so great. A great colleague, Sabrina Curran, looked at those little fragments. I don't know how much was left of those. Little bits, not much, because I looked through them and I said, this person's burned really bad. And she's convinced me that they're all deer bone. So they're not people. That's the beauty of science. It is, it is what it is. So if it's deer bone, that means they're honoring this person by putting deer. So we learn something new there. That's why we curate, and that's why 25 years later, you can correct what was originally thought. I still think the basic idea is the same. Kind of interesting. They're honoring this person. That means that this mound, when we took him out, when you're dead and you're lying there, and he had bark underneath him, sheets of bark, and then sheets on top. You can do this at home. Your kneecap will be the highest part when you're just lying there. So I took the burned bark off the top of his kneecap, and I sent it to one radiocarbon dating lab, and then I took the bark underneath him at the same spot, and I sent it to a different radiocarbon dating lab. They both came back 200 AD. So we had that date. I felt very convinced that's when they put this person on bark, surrounding him with deer bone, pockets of deer bones, and then buried them, and then came back 3 more times and added more soil. And that's the collective participation of these burials. Even they start those collective burials at 500 BC or BCE, and then they kick up the scale at about 50 BC. And that's what people talk about, this Adena and Hopewell, is the scale of regional integration. This villages really don't change that much in many ways, but the scale of involvement does, because when somebody passes away and 50 people show up, that's one thing. When somebody passes away and 500 people show up, that's a different thing. And that means something. If there's a pattern, it must mean something. This was the intrepid crew. They really did work hard. That's Mariska Weil, by the way. I think she was at Hocking College as a teacher, as an instructor for a while. I just saw her there. Well, then we turned to the Allen site. There's Bram Tucker, who's a professor at the University of Georgia in archaeology, ecology. You won't notice this person, but that's Mike Haining, who is local here. He's the manager at Kroger. I see him all the time, say hello to Mike. Still, one of the great things he did is he got to excavate an archaeological site. So you never forget those. I don't think anybody who's ever excavated a site forgets, oh yeah, that's right, I worked there. No, it's something that's always there as a life experience, even though most people, of course, never go into archaeology. We worked at this Allen site for 4 years, and it was a late prehistoric site. Dave Hudnell, who was the neighbor of Emery Allen, he said, "Al, I got all these artifacts. I said, "It's a late site. It's a big site. It's hard for a field school to do that. It's going to take a long time." But he convinced me, and we spent 4 field seasons at this site. So we know that very late sites. This is 700 AD. We have the earliest maze in the Hocking Valley at this site, dated directly at 700 AD. So we know that has come in, and that transforms the economy and population size and all of those things, just as maize does everywhere in the Americas whenever they get maize. Population size kicks up, and tribal identities shift, and all of those kinds of things happen. And diets change, and health status changes, and they're getting more sugars and all kinds of things with maize. And these villages, we figured, are about 50 to 80 people. So that's a lot bigger than the earlier ones. And we worked there for quite a while. Now, it sounds like pretty easy. I mean, I used to work in Mesoamerica where we, cut through rainforests and crawl through caves and all these different excavations. So it sounds like Ohio's pretty easy, but it is not without its dangers. This is at the Walker site. Tom Walker, who was a professor of political science here, a wonderful fella. We excavated down by the Salt Creek by his site, and then also on his ridgetop. And we found another economic site, and Sarah D'Aloia and I published that. And that was another one of those satellite economic sites that articulated with one of the more terrace-bound sites. Then the county home site. This is where, and the county commissioners here were great. This is where the dog shelter is on State Route 13, right next to the historic county home. Every time I drive up to the Boudinot site up in Millfield, in the morning I'd look to my left and I'd see this rise and I'd say, I bet that's a habitation site. And in fact it was. And the University of Michigan tested it first back in 1970 and found a middle woodland 100 AD hearth. And then I contacted Henry Wright up there, and they never had any notes or anything like that. And I said, if you have any samples, I'll pay for them, that kind of thing. And Michigan never came through. So we said, well, let's excavate this site because we know there's a hearth, we know we have access. And the county commissioners there, again, it's a team effort. I spoke to them, and way back, this is 1998, and they were both wonderful and supportive and said, yeah, we're going to build a dog shelter, so go in there this summer, do whatever you can. And so this is an aerial shot of us in the cornfield to start. And we put a series of units in this cornfield to try to get the idea. Now it was, again, plowed thoroughly, so it was hard in that respect. But this is one of our students, and my son actually, who was a boy at the time, 9, he volunteered a joyful participation in looking at me like, why? Why would you be doing that? He was having a lot of fun. But that's when I told him, we have to be out here. That's where they put the sites. We have to work outdoors, son. Just to show you a little bit of what these domestic sites look like in terms of what we find. This is, at the county home site, a postmo. This is a remnant of the post. And then from the profile, it would go like that. And that's how we know a post was there. And if you have enough of them in a line or a curve, then you know you have some kind of a building. This is a 2-meter across hearth at the county home site. We found 72 of what we call these features. We put them together. What we learned at this site, I just want to see, oh yeah, this is Mike Ensor. I believe Mike still lives in Athens. He went away, got a law degree, or was working at a law degree, and then decided to come back. And I think Mike might be here. We excavated these, dutifully 10-centimeter levels, and you can tell this soil here, it has nothing in it really, but then you get all this organicness and stuff like that, and that tells you you've got posts, hearth, all of those things, that the fullness of what a domestic site would look like. and they didn't randomly get there. A lot of things we learned at the county home. First, this was our deepest site. We had the earliest hearths go back to 2400 BC. So we had, and the latest ones there were 100 AD. So there we captured at this site all of the botanical data that you would need to put together. That's a big part of what Patton did in his dissertation, was looking at those seed stems, nutshell fragments, etc. And Paul, in his the first dissertation from the Hocking Valley, Paul was able to show that at the earlier point in time, when you go back to 2400 BC, there's a lot of nutshells. And as you get higher up in the site, as you get more recent in time, it shifts over to seeds, and they're starting to grow these seeds. And so now we have domestic sites. We also have the botanical inventory, and the county home was great at that. Another thing we learned at the county home site that another student did, we mapped out all the points, all of the hearths and posts and everything, and the posts are in the same spot. All of the posts, essentially, where they're building at 2400, probably small circular structures. That's the same spot they're building when they're building larger structures. The best spot is where they want to be. So there's an insight there that people see the same things when they're building. Then we moved out into the woods, Tabor Well. There's Nicole right there. And Jesse, a lot of people. He got a PhD at Ohio State in biological anthropology. Mike Mitchell, I can't remember his name, gosh. Only 240 of them, how could I forget? This was in the woods, and I wanted a site, a domestic site, and this is where Ann Kramer from Wayne National Forest was fabulous, because this is the first site we dug at Wayne National Forest. And they have been a partner. Talk about team effort. They have been a fabulous partner with Ohio University in archaeology. I mean, everyone benefits. We dug this site. I wanted to dig this site. I think Ann said to me, we have a couple flakes. You want to try this one? And I said, yeah, sure. It was in the right land form, and then we tested it. At the end of one field season, we tested it for a week, and we found all this great stuff. And I said, oh yeah, at this site, we found something like 14,000 pieces of lithic debitage or waste. It was, all these other ones you're finding a few hundred. And this one we found, I think I calculated out from the 16% that we excavated to the rest, it would have been like 40,000 flakes, or something like a ton or two and this is science, this is great. Paul, this past summer, excavated a site, that Greendale Ridge top site, and right there are the quarries. It's right across the road from this site, are the quarry pits that those people living at Tabor Well were going up the ridge, quarrying those specific pits, bringing that stuff down, creating all this debitage. And then when they'd move over 100 meters to build their next village, I don't know yet, we haven't investigated. I think they go back to the old abandoned village or hamlet, and they still reuse it. To me, it's like a model I've been working on where, how you rotate Sweden agriculture. Well, this is a kind of model where you rotate your villages. So after you leave like a Swidden field, an old abandoned field, it's still valuable for many ways. It's just not where your primary production is. But you get other kinds of vines and other kinds of plants come in. So it's still a resource. Well, when you have a village that you've lived in and then you move, 2 or 3 houses, and then you move 100 meters, it's still there. So you could use it for a lot of different things, and then it will go. So anyway, we dug this site. Then we went to a rock shelter. There's the young Paul Patton. A rock shelter again on Wayne National Forest. I'd never dug a rock shelter. And I said, well, this is my chance. So I dug one of these. Stacy Spursel, who's coming in this month, got her master's degree on this rock shelter. And we started to map out these, and Paul Patton excavated a rock shelter on his mom and dad's land, the Patton Cave, and found very much the same pattern. They're not randomly using these spaces. There's actually a great planned use of the interior of these rock shelters. Where are you going to throw your waste of the deer that you're butchering? It's not random. Like people are really careful in the use of their space. And I'm just teaching Mesoamerica this semester, and the Gila Naquitz rock shelter in Oaxaca is the same kind of rock shelter. And they have the same planning. I mean, there's where they do things. I'm thinking there's a lot of spatial patterning that we see. So we excavated this rock shelter. Here's Josh McConaughey. He works for he got a job after college, after OU. He also learned real estate. So he had archaeology and real estate. So what are you going to do with that? He got a job at the Archaeological Conservancy up in Columbus that goes around the Midwest and buys archaeological sites. So you have to know archaeology, and who would have figured you have to know real estate value. So Josh got that job, and he's been there, and I imagine will take over when Paul Gardner retires at some point. And he cut his teeth on this rock shelter. Now, it's not a very good slide. Yeah. Well, this is Paul's grandparents who are here, Mr. and Mrs. I call everyone Mr. and Mrs. Patton. But great landowners. This is not a very good slide because it didn't transfer well, but this is part of their backyard. They let me rip up their backyard and to find their house at the time. Now they've moved since. Their house is right over here, and then this slopes off. Like I say, unfortunately, it's not the best slide. This is another one of those hearths, and here, this site was unique, and we had the first house at 100 AD in the Hocking Valley. This was in their backyard. So now we not only have the posts that sort of intimate that people were there and living there, we actually found the house. And it's unique, really, because it was never plowed. It was on a terrace, and no one had ever plowed this particular land. So when we started to dig, we could find the actual living floor. This was dated at 100 AD. This is the floor that people 2,000 years ago stood on. So this was exceptional for us because it had never been plowed. So now we had the outline of their house, and they built with what type of house? Wattle and daub, where you're putting posts in the ground. You're then putting a lattice work around the house. People live in these. I lived in one of these for a year. And then you put mud or daub, and then you often burnish it, and it's a very solid house. This is a house, like I say, I've lived in them. People all around the world live in wattle and daub houses. This is an all-season house. This is not a house that you build, expend all that labor, all that time, all that effort. You create thick walls, 12 inches thick, and then you live there 3 months and move. This isn't one of those. So there's an architectural mid-range hypothesis or evidence, I would, just simply that now we've got this transition. And they built this house 3 times over. They built it, they used it for 5, 8 years. They brought in 20 centimeters, 8 inches of soil. They filled it over. They built it right over the same posts, right in the same outline. They lived there for 5 to 8 years. It got funky. They brought in another 20 centimeters. There's your elevation. So you can see them on the road because it's not the Middle East. It's not a tell. But it sort of is a tell for me in that you can see this rise. And that's because they're bringing in 20 centimeters of soil every time they rebuild so they get a clean floor. Because otherwise you get bugs. And you don't want bugs, not just for adults, but kids live in these houses, and you do not want bugs. It's dangerous. It's unhealthy, and and it's harmful to children. So, and Paul and I wrote a piece just in 2016 stating that why are they doing these kinds of things? And part of it is health. So we have these flimsier houses, presumably, but we haven't found them yet. And then we now have at 100 AD, absolutely, this is the Middle Woodland or Hopewell. So some of you who know something from the Scioto Valley, there's a big site out there, Brown's Bottom, and that's this monstrous house. 15 meters by 15 meters. This is the Taj Mahal of houses. And I've always said, well, you got to have something before that. They didn't go from small little circular things to this monstrous house. And this house is one of them. And I think I'd have it's a rendition of what this was. But we have, because it wasn't plowed, we have the outline of this house. We have interior posts that would have been benches. We have activity areas right around the house. And that's an article that Paul and I and others, Mike Pastrui and my wife Ann, is probably going to work on at some point when I stop doing those crossword puzzles. And really work out the artifacts, because this is where they're working. You know, these are storage features. This is where they're cooking their food. This is where they're cooking their food on the inside when it's raining and that kind of weather. But this is an all-weather house. So at 100 AD, I know some of you who know a lot more about archaeology, you know there's a debate by some on were they sedentary in the Hopewellian time period, the Middle Woodland. Well, since 2008, I've known they were not. They were completely sedentary, because you don't build this house randomly. Again, there's a logic to these things. Then we went to the Patton 3. Oh, I think this now works. No. And the Patton 3 is Paul's, they're Paul's parents' land. I just follow Paul's family around the county. Whenever they buy land, I just follow them there. But it's worked out pretty well. Because where people build today is where people built in the past. Like I say, there's a non-randomness to it. This was the crew. I think there's Mike right there, Mike Pastrui. Again, I was blurry on this one. I got very ill during this one. The first and only time I got ill during an excavation. I think I had whooping cough. And it was very hard to actually excavate. And then it was like 103 degrees the first day. It was like, I guess this global warming thing really is true, because it affected us in that particular. But this is after Paul's parents' land, right just outside of town here. And this excavation was 2 years. These were my last excavations. This is the crew in 2012. There's Paul and the rest of the crew here. Paul at that point was a graduate student. He was really the co-director at that point. I was fading out. But the shirt was still working. I don't know. I could always count on the shirt, you know. Nonetheless, these ridges were not there. But this is me directing this excavation. And there we got this bulldozer. Again, Mr. Patton helped a lot. The landowners, boy, without them, you know, it does not get done in any possible way. But here we were able to, they were kind enough to let us, and even set up the bulldozer for me, so we could blast off big swaths of land. And this one also, importantly, it bailed me out too, because there were not that many artifacts. A friend of mine from Columbus, I said, why don't you come down and do a remote sensing, a survey for me, an archaeomagnetic survey. Jared Burks, some of you may know him, and he's like a fabulous archaeologist, and he's, I think, a pioneering archaeologist in many ways. He can detect sites from the surface. He can find out what features, what hearths and posts are under the ground. So you don't have to dig to find them, you just get Jared out there. And I think he took a very low salary, and I took him out to Chinese, and that's all he required. He's just a wonderful contributor to archaeology, and he's saving a lot of the Hopewell and discovering a lot of the Hopewell earthworks through his work. He came out and found 8 features, and then we tested those, so we knew we had things, because I didn't find very much in the plow zone. I think this is one of those in survey you might pass it by without his remote sensing work. But we found some houses here. This is the outline of the house. These are the 2 hearths, one, and then they built another one. This is structure 5. Oh, and that's my last slide. I wanted a nice one to end on. At this site, this was, I didn't have a slide of it. We found these late houses, and I thought they were about early woodland, about 380 BC, but most of them are not. They're much later. However, underneath one of them is a set of posts that are 380. So we know that at between 200 and 400 BC, the question at this site that this site answers is, what were they living in before that 100 AD house? And what we have is the remnants of a house that is at roughly 380 BC. That is still an all-weather house. And I just, over this weekend, my son and I, he visited, I said, could you help me out on this p-value thing? And he's pretty good at statistics, as Eileen might know. And he said, I can do this in like 5 seconds. So I said, okay, great. And he showed that we have this remnants of a house at 380 BC, or BCE. And then underneath it, about 10, 12 centimeters, is a circular house. So we have a small circular house. And I said, okay, Zach, look at the posts. Let's take all the posts from that, and let's take the posts from above it and see if they match. And he said they don't. There's a statistically significant. The posts on the bottom, at the lowest part, in a circle, are about 18 centimeters in thickness. So you have a thin-walled house. And it's small. And that's what these HGs, these hunters and gatherers, were living in. When they're nomadic, they're living in circular houses. And they match up with circular small houses in southern Ohio, elsewhere, the Davison site, and in West Virginia and other places. So the HG populations were moving around building these smaller houses. They're investing low energy because they're not going to be there more than 2-3 months. And that's what people do. If you're not going to be in a place for a long time, you're not going to put in a new lawn. You're not going to invest in your home if you're only going to be there for a year. Well, these people were smart like that too. They didn't invest in their houses a lot if they were only going to be there 2-3 months. An ethnographer did a study in the Kalahari population there, and she asked the San, well, how do you build these houses? And they said, well, we build them with only the effort we need that we expect to be there. Now, sometimes in reality, they're shorter or longer. But it's when they're building, it's based on their expectation of duration. That's all they put in, and then they let it just rot, or they just leave it. Now that's what these people, they built thin, small houses when they expected to be there for a short time. And then we have at this site, and this is the first site we have this, I think it's actually a unique historic event. I think at some point, in a sense, in the fall, late fall, at 380 BC, if you were going to draw this narrative, they said, we're staying here. We're not going to move. And they said, okay, well, we're going to have to build something to make it through the winter because it's pretty harsh. And they built a solid house. And I think maybe it's just I'm excited about it. But I think there's actually that historic hinge event in this big question of the origins of tribal society, that at the Patton 3 site, we actually captured that transition. So we have their economy. There's always more to do. Obviously, Paul has 35, 40 more years. I mean, with retirement being inflated, gosh. But I got out when the going was good. but when you look at, we know where they're living, and we have settlement maps now of where they're living. And then we have the economy from all of these point types and all of these lithics and all of the groundstone. And we have the botanicals for this. I happen to think that the Hocking Valley, which used to be known as a backwater area, as I mentioned, I think this area rivals any in the state of Ohio, really the mid-Ohio Valley, in terms of the amount of data that we have collected over the years with all these students working very, very hard and all these landowners helping us out, and the institutional support, the Wayne National Forest, everything happening that, converging that I think we have answered in some respects that particular question. You know, it takes decades to answer anything in science. So that's where we've ended, and I stopped in 2012, and Paul took over 13 and on, and it's running strong. We have great institutional support, probably more than the $500 I got, probably. Yeah, but that $500 is probably a good investment. So, you know, and I think this stands up at some point. You know, probably some book will be written on, you know, the origins of tribal societies in southeastern Ohio, you know, a more complete book than the one we wrote early on. And I think it'll stand up against any place in Ohio and West Virginia, Kentucky, etc., in terms of answering that question. So I think we probably were successful in many ways. And just thank you very much for showing up. I'm kind of surprised that, to be frank, that people showed up. But thank you so much. I really do appreciate you coming out. Thank you. Yes, if there's any questions. Yes?
Yeah. I'm just wondering, what was the statistical hypothesis?
That they were...
About, and what was the p-value that some help to get? Can you elaborate on this?
Yes, he said it's a question of distribution A versus distribution B, and do they articulate? He knows stat pretty well.
Yeah, but what was the hypothesis?
The hypothesis was that that the post above will not match the post below. In other words, if you're building a house that's circular and it's thin, how will a set of posts in a line that are much thicker articulate with that? And people don't build those. So it was I forget the term that he used. I can't remember, like I say, but he's pretty darn good at stat.
Is it a cluster
No, he mentioned it's about whether they're, like I said, I can't remember, but the peak value he said was off the charts. He said it's 0.00001. He said it's not even. These are completely different architectural episodes.
Is it published?
No, we haven't, but Paul and I are working on that. I trust his stats. To say he's pretty good at stat is an understatement. In fact, I'll brag a little bit. He's actually, I think, invented a stat. He's working on something. He's pretty good at statistics. Anyone else have any questions? Yes.
So you said that at the first Patton site, you found a house that was 100 AD, and it was the oldest house, and then you said the other house was 380. So
That's right. So we revised that. We had found the oldest solid rectangular wattle and daub house, and then at the Patton 3 site, we found an even earlier one. We didn't find it as complete, but we found it matches up. And that's what this analysis was, and Paul and I will publish this with other people. So we've pushed back that. And I've always thought that because they start to bury people on those ridge tops, like the Boudinot site, those mounds start in this area. The earliest ones we have are about 400 BC. The Rock Riffle Run Mound is about 400 BC or so, somewhere in there. And then the Danes Mound too, I think it is 280 that Murphy got, somewhere in there. So we know we have that first phase of settling, of mound building. They've had agriculture or horticulture for hundreds of years, according to Paul's work. And so I think they had to be settled at that point, but we had no data, and that's where your site comes in. The Patton 3 site is provided the data to say when they settle down, that's when they start to bury their dead in conspicuous spots, and that becomes the anchor for this homestead of sites. So they'll move from the Patton 3 at Greg's field, and they'll move over to another field, Dave's field. They'll move then maybe across a little towards the creek, and they'll just use that space. And then a mile away, there's another one. And then a mile away, there's another one. In fact, that geography student, John Waldron, and I did back in 1999, we did a GIS viewshed analysis. I gave him a sample size of 42 mounds, ridgetop mounds from Athens County. And looking at a viewshed, they all could see each other. So if you were standing on a ridgetop, you could see the next mound. At a mound, you could see the next mound. And then from that mound, you could see the next mound. You can go from Nelsonville to Albany connecting the mounds. So I think it's a quick, at 380, this is why I really like that site, even though I got ill. But nonetheless, it's so significant because when they start to settle down, it cascades through the whole region. Everybody says, oh, we better settle down. Because if we move, somebody's going to take our spot. As I jokingly said at a meeting once, at some point in time they stopped playing musical chairs with their kids' health. And that there was a big debate. We have all these debates and we like that. And when you start to say, no, this is about their basic lives. This is about their kids' lives. They can't afford to keep moving because if they move, they're going to give up that best spot. And now that they have agriculture or they're growing food, they can afford to stay there. So I think all of these things articulate. And then they have to start creating these economic sites on ridgetops, et cetera, to maximize what they get from their concentric zone. Yeah.
The burial you talked about that was covered with bark and had bark underneath, did you source the bark?
No. Yeah, Paul is doing it.
Okay.
They were doing a more detail. I'm a big picture guy. In other words, I don't have his skills. You become a big picture guy. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, how, when you're talking about this work, you think about sort of geographic extent, what sort of land area are we talking about, probably? You talked about this time frame and when you thought this settlement was taking place roughly. What's the extent of this sort of...
You mean throughout the mid-Ohio Valley or just...
Yeah, are we talking...
Oh, this is something actually I'm doing at home now is I'm looking at all of these. I've got all the maps of sites from Ohio and West Virginia, and I'm going to get them from Kentucky as well. And this pattern I went through last week or so, the Kanawha Valley at Charleston, and this is exactly the same pattern you have there. And the Licking Valley in Kentucky, same exact pattern. The Scioto. I think the patterns that we're finding here are exactly the same, all throughout from eastern Indiana to western Pennsylvania.
So sort of the whole Ohio Valley?
Right, the mid-Ohio Valley, absolutely, and probably beyond that. But I think that insight that may be correct is that once they have enough, and Paul's work is essential there, once they have enough ability to grow their own food, they have that option of saying, okay, we're staying here. what historical narrative we want to create can be 10 different ways. But once one of those groups decides we're taking that best spot, we're going to stay there, I think everybody starts to, and then they start to bury people, and they bury them in a non-random fashion, so everybody can see this is where we are. And that's that Neolithic pattern we see in the Middle East and China and all over in Africa, all over the world, is that identity, these megalithic burials in Scotland, in southern England, in Ireland, these are in Germany. These are those communal burials. That's what these are. And in those places as well, in Europe, there's a correlation between where the Neolithic village is and where the burial tomb is. That's exactly what you have here in southern Ohio in the Hocking Valley. So it's a regional process. Any other questions? Okay, well. Oh, wait, Paul.
I'm going to grab the mound.
Okay.
Is it on? No.
I don't know, maybe click it.
I guess I'll have to be very loud, yeah? Okay, so first of all, I want to thank Dr. Abrams for coming and speaking with us today and for leading excavations here in the Hocking Valley, founding the field school 30 years ago this year. And so one of the things that we have is kind of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology in honor of his dedication.
Oh my gosh.
This is every name of every student from the field school over the last 30 years.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice of you. Thank you. Very kind of you. Thank you, Paul.
So just to show our appreciation for the program that you founded and have left so strong.
Yeah.
And all of the students whose lives in a lot of ways you've touched and led to great careers. So thank you so much. There's refreshments out here. And also before you leave, make sure you check out the display here. There's also going to be, opening soon, another display with more artifacts from the excavations over the last 30 years that will be held at the Southeast Ohio History Center, as well as a number of events. If you were in the back and we ran out of flyers and you didn't get one of the flyers, there's some up here that have the schedule of events. It's also on Ohio University's webpage. And then also there are small flyers. As Elliot mentioned, Dave Hudnell, that was a member of the field school and helped with excavations. There is the Dave Hudnell Fund, which the monies that are generated from that fund, you can donate into it, all go towards funding the field school, funding materials and consumables for the field school that help us to keep the program going. And so that is in his honor after his untimely death. So there's a flyer as well if you want to check that out. We appreciate any contributions you can make. And at this time, I just, once again, thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. That's really nice of you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And Jake,
Thank you.
that out.